Jose Cayasso, or Kaya, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thanks a lot for having me, John. Happy to join.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from Costa Rica. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about entrepreneurship generally, but more specifically about your own personal journey and experience as a Costa Rican entrepreneur and how that connects back to various people management and organizational leadership topics. As we get started, I wanted to share Kaya's bio with everybody. Kaya is one of three co-founders and the CEO at SlideBean, overseeing the company roadmap, strategy, and growth marketing efforts. SlideBean is a venture-backed company founded in 2014 and headquartered in New York City. The company closed its first seed round in 2016 and has since become a multi-million-dollar profitable tech company that continues to expand rapidly. He has been running tech startups since 2011, which have earned him recognition as a 40 under 40, plus being a guest speaker in over a dozen startup and tech conferences around the world, including TEDx. What a wonderful background. Again, a pleasure to have you. Anything else you would like to share just generally about your background with the audience before we dive on into the conversation?
No, I don't, that sounds like maybe my LinkedIn. I don't know where that, but I guess that covers. So that's yeah. Let's get to it, man.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, start off by just giving us a little bit of a background. You've been involved in tech for a long time. You've been involved in entrepreneurship and startups for a long time. And that's always a challenging thing. I think that's challenging for anyone in any part of the world. I'm curious about what your experience has been specifically within the Costa Rican entrepreneurial kind of landscape and environment. And then we can talk more about SlideBean and what you've been doing recently.
Yeah, I guess from the people management side, I think that what we've done really well is try and combine these two vastly different cultural approaches to hiring and to scaling a team, right? I learned everything I know about startups in the US, from a combination of starting companies or living in New York or working with other companies based in New York and a little bit. I spent a few months in the Bay Area as well. And there's a culture to startups that's cool. There's beer in the office. There's WeWork. As much as we like to hate on WeWork, WeWork sort of encompassed that a little bit with the way they designed their office and the open spaces. They got rid of the beer now, but that was part of it too. So there's that sort of community. There's that sort of like hard work, hustle approach to startups. To how you run and you approach a team. And I firmly believe that the most successful companies out there, the most successful startups out there are successful in part because of that, in part because of how the early team gets to work together and collaborate and grind a lot, and spend all-nighters and coding and hackathons and all that. Like that, I think that culture is key, but it doesn't happen easily in other places around the world. I don't think it happens in Europe. Work for good or worse, by the way, for good or worse. Like in Europe, it doesn't happen because work regulation, people are very, very strict, and governments are really strict about work-life balance. So that's less likely to happen. And Costa Rica kind of operates a little bit like that, where there is no culture. There's little culture of that, even though some companies do ask their employees to grind. They don't do it for the startup reasons. I think they don't do it because they own equity in the company or they have stock options and they have it done to benefit. They do it because they have strict bosses that get them to, right? But that's, I think, the exception. We operate, I think, closer to the European model. So I think that the exciting part of how we run SlideBean is I think we've tried our best to bring these two things together, where we have that startup vibe, we have that sort of community. It sounds a little bit like marketing jargon, but I think we do have that in the team.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're careful and aware of work-life balance and how people can balance these two things.
Yeah, and if I can just reiterate something I'm hearing you say, which I think is super important, and that is just the recognition that in the startup phase, it is about the idea. It's about the new innovation or the new product you're bringing to market, and there's a lot of effort and work that has to go into that, no doubt. And you're going to grind and you're going to iterate and there's going to be lots of change and rapid iteration, and you need to be agile. Your ability to do all of those things is going to depend on the quality of the people on your team. And it's one thing when you're a small startup team of, say just a few co-founders, versus now you're starting to grow, you're starting to scale, you're hiring more people on, you get outside of that initial founding team. Are you bringing people on that mesh with the values, the priorities, the culture that you have in mind for your organization? Or are there starting to be, conflicts? And what we see in a lot of, especially fast growth startups and organizations, is they just really struggle with that, and making sure that there's alignment and congruence, and finding that balance, between the grind and just that kind of really intense entrepreneurial spirit that has all the energy associated with it, versus, the structure and the scaffolding, the safety nets, the policies, the work-life balance elements, and all of those things that start to build as the organization starts to grow and become more formalized, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. So I think just focusing on the team components is always going to be important. And it sounds like that's been a clear part of your experience and your journey in the various startups and entrepreneurial efforts that you've been involved with. And tell me just a little bit then more about how that's then influenced your work with Slidebeam. You've already mentioned a little bit, but these past experiences leading into your current experiences, and you also talked about a bit of the unique Costa Rican context. It's a little bit more European-like in its model. Maybe we can dig into that a little bit more too.
Yeah, so kind of like work benefits, like standardized work benefits, I think have been kind of coded into law, where paid vacation is mandatory, double pay for extra hours is mandatory, holiday work is not mandatory, and all of these. Yeah, I sort of grew up with this. Maternity leave is probably one of the strongest examples. Where I honestly think like we're in the middle. Like maternity leave in the US is not coded into law. So it's not, companies are hopefully, and in the recent years, it's become more of a thing where there's a predefined time for maternity leave, a paid leave, but it's not the standard in many industries in the US, right? Let's go to the other extreme, which is Europe. And I will call this an extreme, where you have countries. I have friends in Sweden where each parent gets 1 year of paternity leave after each kid, which means that they don't necessarily need to take them together. So you have literally 2 years. So 1 year with the mother. If you play it well, you have 1 year with the mother, 1 year with the father, where they're not working, where they're at home with their kids. And this is fantastic for an employee, but I see it as a manager. And if you have to pay a salary to one of your team members for 1 entire year, it is a lot of money, right? This is probably coming from the government, from a government subsidy, and it's coming from taxes, et cetera. But it is a lot of, for a company, it's a mess, right? Not even talking about the money, it's a mess to just have an employee be gone for a year, for an entire year. And then, the Costa Rican model is, I guess, in the middle, where we have a 4-month mandatory maternity leave, currently no paternity leave. So like that's, I think, kind of a good example of a balance, right? I think that as a boss, as a manager, I think that a year is, it worries me, it concerns me. I think it's a tough position to fill for somebody to just leave for that long. It wouldn't be easy to manage, especially at the pace of a startup. But yes, I do think that no leave at all is unfair. So like kind of bringing these two together to create like this policy that, I wish we had the time to write this into a like official work policy for Slidebeam. But, a lot of the team operates out of Costa Rica. These are the rules that we grew up with, that our parents grew up with. And the team that operates outside of Costa Rica, we're slightly distributed, and we have one of our hubs in New York. So everybody who works outside of these, outside of the Costa Rican legislation, still gets most, if not all, of these benefits. And that's kind of how we approach it.
Yeah, and that actually highlights another important issue, and that is when you have a multinational firm or a distributed team, and you have people in different geographic locations in different countries, or with different sets of employment laws in place, that complicates things a bit, doesn't it? And it sounds like your approach has been to largely take what we might label as kind of stricter guidelines from the Costa Rican side and just say, okay, everyone's going to get those same benefits, whether you're in Costa Rica or not. And that's certainly one approach. And then other times, organizations who are distributed, they'll try to find the balance between consistency throughout the organization versus kind of the local market where the person happens to be in terms of pay, benefits, and those sorts of things. So that's highlights some of the messiness and the challenges that come or can come, at least, with distributed teams. Sounds like you're navigating that just fine, though. And so I think that's fantastic. All right, well, that's wonderful. And now I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit more specifically about SlideBean. Tell us more about the inspiration behind SlideBean and in creating this all-encompassing startup toolkit.
Yeah, so so we started SlideBean as a presentation builder, right? So I think that I have to. Sorry, let me go on with that idea. So we started as a presentation builder. Very quickly, we understood that being a presentation builder was too broad. We didn't raise enough money to be a wide use presentation builder that that could realistically compete with PowerPoint. This is back in 2013. So as silly as this truly sounds today, like a lot of the features that we were bragging about then were, for example, like online collaboration, because it was not a thing. Google Slides was not a thing. I mean, it existed, but it was a really weak platform. So that meant that online collaboration on PowerPoint wasn't great. Keynote didn't have it. So this is a whole different time in the almost 10 years ago in the presentation space. And we came up with this new system on how we design and approach presentations, mostly to let people focus on the content without the distraction of the design and automating that part. Problem with this was it was too broad. We didn't have enough money to really compete with in the entire presentation space. So we chose one area to focus, which was startups. And the presentations that startups need, or at least the presentations that we discovered they were struggling with the most, were pitch decks. So we grew pretty quickly to our first $1 million in ARR just on the backbone of investor deck preparation. Like this is a very particular type of presentation where you're willing to spend a few extra dollars to ensure that it looks good. You need some guidance, etc. Problem was, we discovered maybe a little late, was that how many pitch decks does a company need? A few iterations of one, but that's during a very specific period of time. So that doesn't make for a great SaaS business, because you don't need it moving forward, right? And we were seeing kind of like the classic customer story that we got was, I love you guys. Thanks to your guidance, content, pitch deck, I raised money for my company. I'm just gonna go and grind and build, and I don't need a pitch deck builder anymore, so I'm canceling. So that it was great, but broke our hearts and especially broke our churn. So we've ever since we sort of came to that conclusion, we tried a few approaches to rethinking how we charged for these pitch decks and so on, but nothing that would allow us to really scale to the size of a business that we want it to be. So, in the recent couple of years, we've become this all-encompassing tool. So what we've done is kind of diversify a little bit, like understand what other needs these founders have from the pitch deck. So if you need a pitch deck, you probably need X and Y and Z. And we've done these things because we are startup ourselves. We're a venture-backed company. What if we help these companies prepare these other docs as well? So that's kind of like the stage where the company is today and the product.
Yeah, very good. And that explains, why you focused on the startup space as you're trying to find your niche. I'm wondering how you feel it continues to differ in terms of its relationship to other startup toolkit platforms that might exist out there. How does the all access update build upon SlideBean's existing suite of tools, etc.?
That's a fair question, because we at some point in this discussion, like when we understood that as a pitch deck builder, we were limited in how big of a company we could be. We threw in the idea of, well, what if we build something else, something completely different that's not startup focused? We have a team, we have some money. This SlideBean as a product, generates profit from the subscribers that it continues to get. It's just not big enough for our own ambition for what we want to build this company. So we figured, well, what if we just build another product? But the reason why we didn't go on that path was because we have built something, I think, really strong with the SlideBean brand that people recognize. I think it is a solid brand name in the startup space, and I'm moved every time somebody recognizes SlideBean or has heard about it or uses it. And we've achieved this over many years, right? So just throwing that out and starting a whole new product with a different name that targets a different audience, it is kind of, not only starting from scratch, but wasting that which we have built, right? So I do think that there are other monetizable and much more scalable models and or products that we could serve to these customers, and that's what we're pursuing.
Yeah, that's great. And I know you have a growing YouTube following, 350K plus subscribers. How have you been utilizing that platform to grow SlideBean's platform and continually engage your audience and your customer base?
Yeah, YouTube was a really curious surprise for us because, I consider myself a tech founder first, and only very recently I've accepted the fact that I'm also a YouTuber. But it definitely was not my intention when we started the company. Like, I've always been in charge of the marketing stuff. My two co-founders are product people, so I consider myself a little bit of a product person. But three opinions in the same room are sometimes not very efficient. Also, like, who's gonna, we're building this cool product, who's gonna sell it? So, like, I've from the early in the company, I've sort of like moved into the marketing side. And one of those marketing experiments ended up being, well, why don't we make YouTube videos and see what happens? And that ended up working much better than we had expected. I think, like, I'm also passionate about video on YouTube. I do have a background in animation. I studied digital animation, and which I think has helped even the pitch decks mostly in terms of storytelling, because animation is a very filmmaking based career. So we had a few storytelling, screenwriting classes in college. But this is all to say that YouTube was this surprise. Like, we suddenly discovered that we were really good storytellers on YouTube, and I think that people connected with that. That combined with the fact that YouTube is marketing for SlideBean today. So, like, which of these other CEOs of these SaaS companies has the time and the willingness and they can extract value out of spending sometimes half of my time producing videos about how to run a startup or whatever. Like, few companies can get value out of this, but we are in this very unique position where we can. So that has allowed us to connect and to position the SlideBean brand to early stage entrepreneurs, and that's, again, I think, one of the most valuable assets that we have as SlideBean. And again, one of the reasons why it didn't really make that much sense to pivot into a product that was too different from what we already have and the audience that we already have.
Yeah, and so do you see a lot of carryover between that audience on your YouTube platform versus those who are using the SlideBean platform and offerings?
Yeah, so YouTube is probably our biggest acquisition channel. I'd say that something like 40% of our revenue, maybe up to 50%, is touched by YouTube, which is crazy, because at the same time YouTube generates revenue for us. So we've sort of built this magic, self-sustainable, not self-sustainable. We spend more money than we get from YouTube ads, but still, like, it's a marketing channel that's really successful and also generates some revenue, which is a weird combination.
Yeah, and I'm curious. I'm not really a social media marketer or anything like that, but I'm curious if you've moved into some of the transitions that YouTube's been making in response to TikTok. with the shorts, and maybe you're in the TikTok space, maybe you're not, or maybe you're thinking about it.
Yeah, I do believe that, when you're producing content, you sort of have to really be on top of what's happening, right? On top of the new trends. We have this debate, which is too long for today's podcast, but we have this debate now where we realize that we are good at producing two types of content. One is like these we call the one-on-one videos, which are these deep grind breakdowns of how something works within a startup company, and guides on convertible notes and all this stuff. But we're also really good, and we're really excited about producing content, around, for example, company forensics, which is the stories of why companies and startups failed, or startup hubs around the world, which is this new Startup Planet series we started, and that's really exciting content. But that's our response to realizing that one-on-one content only has access to a limited audience. There's other content could expose us to a much larger audience, and shorts definitely falls into that. I do believe that people's attention spans are growing shorter. TikTok and shorts are a truly remarkable new form of content that people are inevitably consuming, and YouTube is moving in that direction as well. 50% plus of YouTube users now consume shorts, so it is a trend. You can't escape that. And I think TikTok gets a bad rep because it did start as dancing videos, but in the last few months, maybe in the last year plus, it's become a really, really interesting platform. People are doing really creative stuff, really expensive, high production videos. I was at the summit, this video conference, like YouTuber conference, the other day, and Zach King, who's a really huge TikToker, spoke on how they approach their videos, which always have a stunt, like special effects stuff. Like he's spending sometimes $100,000 in production for a 15-second TikTok. So like it is like, that to me was an eye-opener, where like this is a format that matters, that where there's money, where companies are spending money to promote themselves, because it's so organic. Like, my last point to that, I'm just blabbering too much about it. My last point about that is, how marketing has also evolved. Like, we've become much more blind to marketing. Our brains have learned to process and just to ignore ads. Like, how often do you Google something and you realize that the first 3 results are ads, even though like Google's made them so similar to the organic result, but you just know they're ads really quickly and you scroll. So like we've become much more efficient at ignoring ads, but formats like TikTok or like YouTube have allowed brands to create content that doesn't feel like an ad, and that's a really delicate art these days. And one that I think TikTok is TikTok/shorts, short form content is transforming.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I remember it was probably 6+ months ago. I'm just watching something on Hulu, and a Hulu ad pops up, because I don't have the, I have the ad supported version of Hulu. And it was something like, I learned it on TikTok. So it was this whole ad about TikTok as a learning and professional development platform, which I just found fascinating because that's not something I would have ever considered, before. But sure enough, there's lots of people in that space who are making names for themselves and creating, massive followings, by utilizing that, or the shorts on YouTube or on Instagram or whatever, with the reels and such. So it's super interesting to see how all of this continues to adapt and change over time. Well, Kaya, it has just been a real fun conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with me and share your insights and your experiences with me and my audience. Before we wrap things up for today, I wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team, and then give us a final word on the topic for today.
Sure. So again, thanks to everybody for sticking around listening. We help founders scale their business, and as I mentioned, it's around the pitch deck, it's around the storytelling, a little bit around the financial modeling, and we do that for free through YouTube. And for the companies that are really sold on how we approach it, on what we can do to help them, that's where we have the services and the SaaS part. But yeah, I guess that I'll definitely say that YouTube is the place to start. It's free, and I think that you will probably find some good extension. If you found what I've just blabbered about for 30 minutes useful, there's hours of that on YouTube. So that's probably the place to start. Just look us up as Slide B.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I encourage my audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Kaya can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great